let's start with the first speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ville Hinkka, team leader of intelligent supply chains and logistics teams at VTT.
Okay, hello. As another Ville said, I'm working for VTT as a research team leader, and I'm going to tell you about challenges of future supply chain management and possibilities of artificial intelligence to contribute for these challenges. Next slide, please. Okay, and as already presented, sustainability is currently a big driver for supply chain management. And if we start by thinking about what is supply chains, well, supply chains, they are entity of several companies. And important is that supply chains, they compete against each other, not single companies inside the supply chain. And also the supply chain is the as strong as its weakest link is. And traditionally, a successful supply chain is, for example, cost efficient, flexible, and responsible. But nowadays, it should also be sustainable. And the aim of the supply chain management is to make the entire supply chain as efficient as possible. And there has been a discussion about last 10 years about sustainable supply chain management. And it has got a lot of attention, but there are no clear definition about its content so far. Next slide, please. There's something about dilemma between supply chain management and sustainability. Well, the supply chain management investment, they are long-term investments. For example, operating age of freight vessel is decades. For port equipment, it's at least 15 years, and so on. So majority of the current logistic infrastructure, they have many operational years of use, but most of them are no longer sustainable enough. So to become more sustainable, there is a lot of need for more investments. But these investments, of course, they need money, and all these improvements in supply chain sustainability, they increase the operating cost, at least temporarily. And in that way, they decrease competitiveness of the entire chain. And in practice, when a single company they considers investing in sustainability, they have the following challenges. Well, the producing sustainable services cost more, but other customers, for example, manufacturers, distributors, retailers, are they willing to pay extra for this sustainability? And unfortunately, the situation is that until recently, for these service buyers, the only thing that matters has been cost, despite the fact what they have written about in their sustainability reports or so on. And when logistics is a business with low margins, so it's also the challenge for these logistics companies that does these investments towards sustainability lead to financial problems. And on the other hand, if someone who is needing logistics services, they want to buy sustainable services, are they able to find these services? Or if they are able to find them somewhere, they will cost a little bit more. But if it's also take more effort to get these services, so it will be also challenge. Next slide, please. However, there are currently big drivers for sustainability. Well, we know that that was a little bit less than 2 years ago. European Union agreed finally this Green Deal, that where the European Union is committed to have a 55% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And and achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. And then Finland has set the target to achieve carbon neutrality already by 2035. So for example, the port equipment that the Finnish ports are currently purchasing, they are still in operational use in 2035. And this needs to be taken into consideration, that these requirements. However, for transport and logistics sector, we know that they are big producers of CO2 emissions. But they have not been, this industry has not been pressured to improve the situation until recently. For example, these international agreements related to reducing CO2 emissions in global level, they have not been, for example, international air and waterborne transport have not been included in these agreements. And therefore, it has been estimated that, for example, the share of waterborne transport of when global CO2 emissions its share will increase dramatically during the following decades. However, in European Union there is now upcoming standards where in the first phase the big companies, they need to report not only their direct emissions, which they have already reported so far, the scope 1 emissions and scope 2 emissions, which are the emissions of their used energy, but they also need to report their scope 3 emissions. And the scope 3 emissions mean that they need to report also the emissions of their subcontracting. And logistics services, they are a big share of their subcontracting. So these logistics emissions, they will become visible at least in the first phase in the European level, and hopefully quite soon also in the global level. Next slide, please. But the challenge is obviously there is a need for improving sustainability of supply chain, especially by concentrating on transport between supply chain echelons. And also this upcoming regulation, they will highlight if the sustainability performance of the supply chain is poor. However, the progress is slow, and usually we have noticed that there are usually more talks than actual actions. Usually the companies, they take sustainability actions when they are beneficial for them. For example, this is just an imaginary example that, for example, shipping company, they may say that they decrease their emissions by ordering their ships go slower. However, of course, this will produce some savings, but they would get much more bigger savings if they concentrate, for example, engine technologies or used fuel. But these kind of savings, they would require much more bigger investments, and probably the reason for this that the vessel goes slower is so that the shipping companies, they have less cargo to transport. And usually the situation is so that the companies say that they make these sustainability improvements when it's beneficial for them. Of course, by improving their routes, making route optimization, improving utilization rate, they save fuel, and of course in that way they also save money for companies. But when companies need to invest something, then the situation is different. And also, when we know that in 1 year ago, when this global situation changed and this Russia attack to Ukraine, there was this kind of sanctions became visible and so on, and there were become problems of availability of fossil fuels. Instead of getting this as an option for transition to renewable energy sources, The industry instead demanded tax reduction in general and searched alternative sources for fossil fuels instead of making this kind of transition to renewable energy. Okay, next slide, please. Well, my point is that the challenge for artificial intelligence challenge where would artificial intelligence contribute is that how could logistic industry change its mindset and adopt operational models that will significantly improve the sustainability of supply chains. Our team is concentrating on these questions. However, we are not experts in artificial intelligence. We are not using that tool, but we are trying to contribute for this challenge by using so-called traditional research methods. But by introducing this challenge, I would like to hear that how could your experts in artificial intelligence could help us to solve and contribute for this problem. Next slide, please. So I believe that to solve this problem, it needs out of the box thinking. The logistics industry itself may not be able to do that. And for example, there are some approaches where artificial intelligence kind of solution could take into place. For example, the first approach would be that what would trigger the investments towards new sustainable supply chain management solutions and practices. As I already said, that the companies, they have difficulties to make this investment because they are afraid that they will lose their position in the supply chain. They will have financial problems, they will lose their margins, and they will go into financial problems. Then the second approach would be that different supply chain actors, they have different motivations. Like there are companies who has recently invested in infrastructure, which is a little bit too polluting in current environment, but they do not want to make new investments and so on. So what kind of decisions would share the cost and benefits of different actors in a way that motivates everyone to participate in transition towards more sustainable operations? And also most probably these more sustainable practices, they need new kind of technologies, and new technologies, they change when adopting these technologies, the position and power between supply chain actors, they will change. And of course, those companies whose relative power will decrease, they are against this every movement, every development efforts. And then the third alternative approach could be that the transition period towards new operation models is a vulnerable period for a company, and how the company could overcome this period and to prevent these brave companies who would like to make this investment, how they would avoid the situation of financial problem and failing. So next slide, please. Well, if these challenges, if you think that they are a little bit too high level and so on, I will also in the end of my presentation, I will also raise some of the more so-called traditional supply chain management problems where artificial intelligence also could contribute. For example, this route optimization has been a long time a big problem, and now when at the same time trying to minimizing emissions is one thing that where artificial intelligence will certainly contribute. Then The next one is perhaps how to create intelligent cargo that finds its route from sender to receiver. For example, if I want to travel somewhere, I take this kind of route, for example, Google, and take this kind of route suggestions, and I will select which kind of transportation modes I take, where to go bus and so on. But how would cargo do that itself? That there is no need for someone outsider to find out that where the cargo lies and how to move them. Would it be possible that the cargo itself or product itself find its routes and go to the right place, or order the right transportation? Then of course the optimal packaging and unloading of the truck, container, and so on. They are the typical artificial intelligence challenges. Then adaptive layout for warehouses, container field, and so on. Like usually in warehouses, there are fixed places for certain products. But of course, the situation changed that there are seasonal changes and so on. And like the warehouse is sometimes empty or sometimes more full of products. How could this warehouse places or container field places or every other places could be adaptive? And then like the self-driving equipment, trucks, vessels, how could artificial intelligence contribute for that development? Because it will take a little bit more time when there are in public roads there are like self-driving taxis. But for example, port environment, it's closed yard. There is so already possible to implement these kind of self-driving vehicles, and many ports have already done that. But there are many challenges that artificial intelligence could contribute. Okay. Thank you for your attention. It was my presentation. I'm willing to and happy to answer any questions you have.